Good evening. I'm going to do a little bit of reading here from my book, Foundation of the Elders. This is the chapter called Logical Structure Designed for Truth Seeking. Um, we're dealing with some philosophical ideas and science ideas and stuff like that. And my opinion is an opinion, okay? And I'm sure I'll get some flack from the science guys because, well, I think some parts of science are not really all that sciency. They're not accurate enough. So we'll just leave that at that. Um, and I'll deal with the comments in the comments section afterwards. In preparation for studying Yahweh's word, a structure should be set down as a groundwork and foundation for how the learning and research will take place. And the logic a person should grow in leading the simple to understanding. As a person who once was not loyal in heart to Yahweh, or even wanted in my heart to serve, perhaps it might be good to start with the ego battle, which was my experience, and after explore the logic and stability of truth concepts. Yes, I'm a human too, and at one time I didn't want to serve God. As a person, my ego battle began after having been baptized during a time of personal weakness. Questions of the existence of God and the base desire not to be a slave or be required to bend my wants, desires, drives to someone else formed in my mind. In essence, a mental shout of, why should I follow you? I want to do what I want to do. My answer to the question of God is probably very different from others, as it is most cerebral and less evidence-based. Looking at it from a mathematical and physics perspective, there are several unexplained natural laws, or at least the explanations in my mind, which sound like horse manure. Why does the ocean stay at the shoreline? How is gravity created? The two questions are both related. The physics explanation for the shoreline is the gravity holds it in place, and the moon is responsible for the tides. At first thought, this does not seem flawed until gravity itself is examined. Gravity is said to be caused by mass, but not electricity, radiation, light, or any other known measurable identifiable property in physics. I disagree. This opinion having been arrived at after having reviewed the experiment process attempting to prove mass to gravity connections, in that it needs a completely zero or near zero atmosphere free of microstatic, micromagnetism, air movement, low light, micro vibrations, radiation, and invisible waves, and heat, a near impossible thing to achieve. The common explanation comes from theoretical physics and states gravity is caused by space-time curvature, ripples, bends, or suctions, possibly caused by uneven distributions in mass and, in a nutshell, density. As a logic system, it is flawed. It happens, yes, but the explanation of why it happens is horse manure, mostly because of how chaotic asteroid belts and meteor clusters are, the general chaos of matter and space, and the amount of different energy types needing necessary nullification for the experiment processes. Some of those previous things perhaps have visible and measurable negative gravity. There is at least one asteroid that I know of that's got negative gravity. Fluid dynamics of oceans are even more improbable as scientific gravity explanations. The relatively large amount of underwater eruptions, and in some cases extremely low level of land, should have caused mass disaster worldwide in low elevation areas, especially lowland plains, marshes, and swamp areas. A tectonic shift of inches and feet in the world's ocean should shift shoreline sea levels and change coastlines in many areas, or cause disasters far greater than experienced because of water displacement and wave action. Oddly, this is not the case. This is my personal opinion, and it is where science and theoretical physics failed. This probably had more impact on me having grown up in Florida, a place where a lot of land is within a few feet of sea level, and having had experience in land surveying, measuring elevations, and wondering why the entire state was not flooded with surface level salt water. This part of the struggle in my mind lasted perhaps a year, at which point the decision was made to table it. After years of partial thinking on this subject, there are many scientific coincidences which cause a fantastic, mind bending balance act about how they are caused. Almost every single science and physics principle known to man somehow feeds into the reasons why the oceans do not spill over into land. This cannot be coincidence. It is more complicated than the theoretical physics of space-time or mass calculations. If you would like to get into a study which is simply beyond all human limits to comprehend, study why the shores stay bound where they do. Okay, so some personal background. I grew up in Florida. I did land surveying when I was younger. I've done a little bit of civil engineering work. Um, I can math, guys. Yay! um, so this here is really like, I just, you know, most of Florida is within 10 feet or less of sea level. We do have high points, but our high point for the state of Florida is like 76 feet or something, at least for central Florida. So it's really low land. And, there's absolutely no reason why this state shouldn't have been flooded multiple times over, even with small earthquakes, okay? Or super waves or anything like that. All that stuff should be like devastating to our coastline. Um, and it's not. We get hurricanes, we get these huge hurricane waves, and the coastline still stays where it is. So, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of the science stuff really has no good, valuable explanation why we're not having problems down here. Okay. And it is what it is. That's my opinion. It's a fairly moderately educated opinion. But it's not like, I'm not PhD level physics, like, so there's things that I understand that I don't understand, but I also know for a fact that a lot of the things that I know I can understand don't seem to pan out. So whatever, it is what it is. All right, King James Version, Job 38, 8 through 11. Or who shut up the sea with the doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb, when I made the cloud, the garment thereof, and the thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and brake up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. And that's talking, that's God talking, saying, hey, ocean, stop here, don't go any further. Makes sense to me. Okeechobee is at sea level, I mean, there's no reason why that land shouldn't have salt water just flooded all over it. The issue of ego clash did not take very long, just a few weeks. In the realm of your mind, if you imagine God and yourself as equal thinking entities, this process could take a lifetime, which is at the start what I struggled with. Even if the mind is supremely critical of God, especially on subjects of good versus evil, fairness versus unfairness, beauty versus grotesque, servitude versus freedom, my case was one of the latter, not wanting to be enslaved. The breaking of the ego struggle in my case was one of first identifying the probable limits and intelligence of God. Even if I did not understand the goal and purpose of God or his intelligence, if God did create everything, then he was smarter than me. If he only inspired just the word, he's still smarter than me. If he created everything, he had more might. My issue, being one of feeling enslaved, was broken by a simple thought. If, as a person, I do not want to serve God, I do not have to. But this will lead to my personal destruction. If I choose to serve in free will, then I am a free man as a friend instead of a slave. Because if eternal life is a possibility, then doing someone else a few small favors is a small price to pay to get it, especially when what is asked is to live a socially peaceful life. On the other subject of good versus evil, fairness and versus unfairness, beauty versus grotesqueness, at this point, God makes the rules, so why contest them? He can smush us like less than bugs on a whim, so why should we take the chance of angering him? The only reasonable thing to do is to ask him why he does the things he does, or search for answers he has already given. There are answers to all of those questions in the Bible if God is indeed the God of the Bible. What type of God should a person choose to be friends with? The answer should be obvious, but perhaps not. If all of the options for God are on the table, then there are multitudes of other gods which might be the God or one of the gods. In my opinion, the God should be trustable, true, very mighty, knowledgeable, and one capable of being friendly. Because there are some dumb gods out there, powerless gods, and unfriendly gods in the realm of gods, so to speak, if you look at all the religions in the world. There are some gods which at this point are obviously false. Most of those are in stories about the specific god fighting a set of mythic creatures. This pares down the list dramatically, removing a great number of gods due to the lack of evidence found in nature. There are, of course, a number of myths where there was only one of the creature fought, and those cannot be discounted because the evidence has not been found yet. Then there are gods involved in myths which are evidently false. Most of these include continents based on the backs of large animals and such, or on the backs of another god, or some other part of the creation story or myth that has no compatible observable evidence with our modern evidence. At this point, entire civilizations of belief have been culled. Then there are gods who were said to have lived in a particular place that since then has been frequently visited, and no god has been found. A quick Google search can show several lists and books with a total of gods well over 3,000 at the start, not counting the millions of Hindu gods, which after the end of filtering for both truthfulness, trust, and consistency dramatically shortens the list. What good is a God who is not truthful, trustable, and consistent? It would be no good to do favors for a God who is a liar, untrustable, and inconsistent. When all things are said and done, the God of the Bible stays on the list, at least in terms of social reliability. If not, the only one left on the list, even if we personally may think his teachings are harsh or punitive. As a writer, I must admit to having never completed my scientific studies. In the future, I will, if it is in God's will. The extent of my personal knowledge on those subjects is several weeks researching various cultural religions on every continent and finding the myths did not match with recorded real evidence, and months and years fact-checking science. Admittedly, while the creation written in the Bible seems fantastic, it yields the same result as the earth we live on. Why the God of the Bible? The historical locations in his books all match the real world. There have been scientific evidences found because of the writings in the Bible. Things like the female sex of an ant colony, the roundness of the earth, the worldwide flood, even the flesh-rotting bacteria used under the law to judge a woman as an adulteress. Evidence-based science confirms the Bible. Hypothetical and theoretical science often conflict, but having said that, those hypotheoreticals, while attached to facts, often enough attempt to extrapolate facts with little to no measurable proof, or create ideology based on guesstimates. Neither are acceptable as hard fact or science. It was my constant confirmation of history, natural evidence, and actual fulfillment of prophecy during the time I am alive, which has proven to me the God of the Bible is real. In the end, it is a choice, as is anything else. If you go to school, if you choose to drive, a career choice, a music type, or what experiments chosen in college, or which archaeological digs to explore, or textbook to use, or political leader to follow. This choice just happens to be important. In my discussion with others, what is often not really the first to be discussed, but features a prominent role in decision making on what view to hold is, I don't want to do that, or I like my sin. And the person then leans in deeper to an argument or view than is wise. I will give an example. The atheistic evolutionist. We live in essentially infinite space, height, width, depth, and time. It is vast, uncomprehendibly so. Massive, in fact, infinite as far as we can measure. The evolutionist view attempts to say that all alleles, DNA proteins, change and create different life form groups. This change is called a coefficient in science. Change coefficients are used to calculate all sorts and forms of scientific physics equations. The problem for the atheistic evolution is this. Multiplying evolution's coefficient by time, height, width, and depth of the universe yields a massive infinite number. This number represents all life. Now, the core of the problem is this question. If there is any chance of a God being created, any chance at all, then atheism is defunct, a failure of a belief system, simply because any very small chance of a God leaves us with a very, very large, but still exceedingly smaller than all life, infinite number. So because of the science, and math disagreeing, we can identify a large logic problem. Does this prove the God of the Bible? Not necessarily. It takes a much longer logic proofing to do so. Does it prove the existence of gods? Yes. So rather than overcomplicate our mental self-justification, it is better to simply admit, I do not want to, than lie to ourselves. Is honesty a Christian and Jewish, a God of the good book value? Yes. Am I trying to convince you of its value? Yes. Part of the reason is my faith. Another part is for mental stability, social stability, business relationship trust, scientific acceptability, and bias removal. As a person needs honesty, truth, those facts and sound logic have value of their own. These are the building blocks of trust. As a personal view, I prefer to interact with others who can understand their own wants, desires, and admit if they prefer to sin or not. Mental problems, such as I have experienced in the past, cause a person to have a difficult time understanding and fighting it mentally without prior habit training. If a person is used to if a person is used to searching for facts, rejecting intellectual flaws, and does not use flawed logic, they will more easily notice their own warped perception and habitually attempt to correct it if they have mental problems. This leads to an easier acceptance of the need for medicine, counseling, and noticing when situations, foods, or activities improve mental health. As often as not, the insanity can be perceived as fun, and a person not previously habitually honest may give up and play because they like it. Societal honesty for stability reasons is much easier to understand the need of. Voting needs to be with honest counts. Politicians need to do as they tell you and be the person they tell us they are. The married need to keep true about their fidelity. Friends and family need to be able to trust the things we say so their own emotions are legitimate. Humans do not react well when important relationship emotions are either falsified and found out or based on fake information. We expect to be able to trust our loved ones, and with continued breaking of trust, love dies. Thus, honest truth is valuable for society. Business relations also need truth and honesty. Business operates on honest money transactions, and customers learn not to buy from the dishonest. Or, as in the case of China, or cabal as they call themselves, lack of truth leads to economy collapse. This is talking about the business Evergrande. It's state funded, and they built up a bunch of basically really low quality buildings, and so the Chinese are not even living in them because the buildings are falling apart before they can even move in. It's an absolute horrible trust issue between the citizens and the government and this business. That's causing economic problems and collapse over there. It is simple to understand the need of truth in business. It is beneficial, binds together, and builds even bipartisan relationships in government. On the science front, it becomes let me start over. On the science front, it becomes a complete lie if dishonest fact manipulation, inaccurate findings, misplaced logic, or bait and swapped evidentiary truth for rhetoric. This would not affect most of society day to day. The impact would be seen in seasonal, by year, or decade impacts to school teachings, lowered value to collegiate professors and their ability to develop new technology, new employees making decisions based on false knowledge, lack of new industry developments, and bad government decisions based on rhetorical fake science. A current example of this is carbon capture technology, carbon credits, and past community and government concerns over this. It is a very good example of all the current problems. Extra CO2 causes greater plant growth and creates a heating effect. However, it is a supply issue and management issue combination, not necessarily a production issue, and is soon kept from being a failure of ecology if properly dealt with. Plants can create or reduce heat based on age, color, or type. CO2 is absorbed because they live, and most of the plant structure is carbon. We as humans already have all the tools we need to fix the problem. The problem exists in management style. If we plant light, green, heat producing crops, the carbon causes a heat problem in the atmosphere and growth of the plants. If we plant darker colored plants, the heat is not generated in growth. The CO2 is captured in such a way that less heat is generated and the environment is cleaned of excess CO2. These have been studied in depth in regenerative agriculture. It is not the only management style necessary, but is, however, a starting point. Current science rhetoric teaches CO2 is bad, and we need industrial solutions to a dying Earth problem. Hang on. If the rhetoric is because of big businessmen and scientists collaborating for a future chemical need in order to make something new and profit, fine. Just be honest about it. Alternatively, if it is true, then the industrial solution, while maybe useful for business, is false, and the fix is doing carbon to soil improvements. These consist of changing our cattle management style from a one pasture style to migration pattern grazing, adding sheep, goats, and grazing birds, and using a smash roller when the grass is tall instead of cutting it. Growing the tree alternative to ground crops may help too, replacing some tomato crops for tomatillo or leafy green ground crops for tree varieties, thus increases shade, wood supply, and permanent or semi-permanent ground covering undergrowth, rather than barren fields due to plowing. Our large acreage management practices lower tech. Hang on. Rather than barren fields due to plowing, large acre management practices, lower tech, easy to implement, and cost efficient compared to industrial solutions. Okay, that sentence didn't make sense. I'm going to have to rewrite some of this. It happens sometimes when you're writing. That's the reason for these videos, so I can read through it and know that there's a problem somewhere. Adjusting laws, regulations, and teaching better industry standards to make this happen is the simplest way to solve the issue. It will lead us to a different industrial attitude when we can free ourselves of the laws and regulations because the next generation think it is right. This has the benefit of not depending on decaying industrial structures. The benefit is in the use of existing technology to produce a reproducible, increasing size adjusting agricultural industry but hang on a second. The benefit is in the use of existing technology to produce a reproducible, increasing, size adjusting agriculture, comma. Industry just cannot challenge in terms of ability to handle the resource mismanagement we have at current. All of the argument of now is based in scientific collection of data, formation of hypotheses, and those hypotheses getting fed into a system manipulating the collection to feed back into and change the original data and hypotheses to a better politically arguable form. It is bad science, bad logic, false truth, and dishonest. It cannot be trusted. The science should have stopped at, we have an overabundance of CO2 we need to fix. A fast examination of what fossil fuels were made of tell us the simple answer is plants and animals, essentially agriculture. So let us use agriculture. Bias removal is dependent on whether or not a person is capable of grounding themselves in fact first rather than emotion. And if they choose to look into the past and examine the personal quality of knowledge and possession without grounding in fact, self-control, good logic, and pure intentions, bias removal is difficult. With facts, self-control, good logic, and pure intentions, this becomes easy, and if those qualities are consistent, then bias removal is already complete. Bias can do many things: create mob mentalities, foment unnecessary arguments, cause a person to embrace a destructive view, and show yourself as a fool before others of knowledge. The sorry thing is, bias depends on trusting false information and bad emotions, both hard to fix without the will to change the core of one's being and the motivation to keep the change. Confirmation bias, for instance, works on the ease of confirming previously flawed beliefs. First knowledge, or anchoring bias, is the human tendency to believe and repeat the first knowledge source. It is a learned behavior during infancy and continues in our subconscious minds as part of the human condition. These are not the only biases, but a few of the more concerning ones. We as humans need to study our bias flaws to understand where, how, why, and when our minds trick us, and when our emotions are our undoing. Then we can absorb facts and adjust our emotions and logic while built on those. Please glean what you can. Consider the need for truth, trust, honest relations, and sound logic. Consider their value to yourself, outside the realm of religion. Then consider religion itself, the value it has had in your life for the society. Consider honestly admitting both value and your personal choices. Religion exists to teach a moral code for eternals to live by. More important, it teaches the existence of God, an existence mathematically unprovable to previous generations, but now provable.